Hey, and welcome back to JBC English Learning Academy. My name is Laura, and I'm here to guide you on your journey to clear, confident, and natural English. If you truly love your ma'am, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, keep watching the video, and comment on how much you love ma'am. Your support truly helps this channel grow. Alright, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin today's session. In this story, I want you to walk with me slowly, like we are taking a quiet evening walk together, side by side, breathing gently, listening to the soft sounds around us, and feeling calm as we begin a long journey into the psychology of self-discipline. A journey that is not only about learning English, but also about learning how to understand yourself, because sometimes the hardest part of improving your life is not learning the vocabulary or practicing sentences, but learning how to stay with something even when you feel tired, confused, or uncomfortable, and that is exactly where our story begins, in a small moment of everyday life, where a young man named Daniel wakes up one morning and realizes that he has been avoiding something important for a very long time, something simple, something quiet, something that does not shout at him but whispers gently in the back of his mind every day, telling him that if he wants to change, he must start now, not tomorrow, not next week, not when he feels motivated, but today, right here, right in this small moment where he decides to stand up and face himself. And as Daniel opens his eyes and hears the soft hum of the morning outside his window, he feels a strange mix of hope and fear. Because he knows that change is possible, but he also knows that change is uncomfortable, and yet he sits up slowly, like someone learning how to move again for the first time, placing his feet on the cool floor, breathing in deeply, and telling himself that maybe, just maybe, this is the day he will finally start building the self-discipline he always wished he had. And as he walks to the kitchen and pours himself a glass of water, he feels the weight of the past months on his shoulders. All the times he said he would start studying English but didn't. All the times he promised himself he would get up early and exercise, but stayed in bed. All the times he dreamed about becoming a better version of himself, but never took the first step. And yet, on this morning, something feels different, as if a small light has turned on in the dark, a light that says, "You are not stuck, you are simply beginning." And this soft message fills him with a quiet courage, a courage he never noticed before. A courage that does not shout, a courage that simply stands with him, waiting for him to take one small step. And as he looks at his reflection in the kitchen window, he thinks about how strange it is that people believe self-discipline is something loud and powerful, something that hits you like lightning and suddenly changes your life, when in reality it is something gentle, something slow, something you build one small action at a time, like learning a new language. And Daniel smiles a little because he realizes that maybe he does not need to change everything today. Maybe he only needs to understand one simple thing. Self-discipline begins the moment you make a promise to yourself and keep it, even if the promise is small. Even if it is just 10 minutes of focused effort, even if it is just telling yourself, "I will start," and actually starting. And as he takes a slow sip of water, he thinks about why he has failed so many times before. And he realizes something important, something he has never noticed. He failed not because he was weak, not because he lacked intelligence, not because he lacked motivation, but because he depended on motivation alone, and motivation is like the wind. Strong one day, weak the next, moving fast, then disappearing, never stable, never reliable, while self-discipline is like the ground beneath your feet, solid, steady, always there if you choose to stand on it. And this realization makes Daniel pause. Standing quietly in the kitchen, listening to the sound of birds outside, feeling the stillness of the morning, and he begins to understand that self-discipline is not a natural talent, but a practice, a skill, something you learn, something you train, something you build. Slowly with patience, like building a house brick by brick, and for the first time in a long time he feels hopeful, because skills can be learned, and if they can be learned, they can be improved, and if they can be improved, then maybe his life can change too. And this hope is warm and soft, not loud or dramatic, just a gentle feeling that sits quietly inside his chest, telling him that today is a beginning, not an ending. And so Daniel walks back to his room, sits at his desk, and opens a small notebook, the same notebook he bought many months ago when he first promised himself he would become better at English. A notebook that is mostly empty except for a few words he wrote on the first page. Words that now feel like a message from a past version of himself. Start small. Start now, and he touches the page with his fingertips, feeling a little emotional, because even though he wrote those words long ago, he never truly listened to them. But today he decides to listen. Today he decides to take one small step. Today he decides to do something simple. He will study English for 10 minutes, not because he feels motivated, not because he wants fast results, not because he expects perfection, but because he wants to practice self-discipline. And when he sits there, with his notebook open, he feels a quiet resistance inside him, a small voice that says, "It's too hard, maybe later," and he breathes deeply because he recognizes that voice, the voice that always pulls him away from growth. The voice that always convinces him to stay comfortable, the voice that tells him dreams are too big and effort is too heavy. But today Daniel chooses to speak back to that voice, gently and calmly, saying, "I hear you, but I will start anyway," and he begins reading English sentences slowly, letting each word sit softly in his ears, and as he reads, he does not think about mistakes. He does not think about progress. He only thinks about staying here, in this moment, doing one small thing he promised himself he would do, and that simple act, that tiny continuation, becomes the seed of self-discipline. Because self-discipline is not about doing big things perfectly, it is about doing small things consistently, and as the minutes pass, he begins to feel something new inside, a sense of calm, a sense of control, a sense that he is finally doing something. For himself, not for others, not for praise, not for success, but simply because he wants to grow, and after 10 minutes, he closes the notebook softly, not with pride, but with peace, because he understands that the goal is not to be perfect, but to return again tomorrow, to show up again and again, even when he doesn't feel like it, even when it feels boring, even when the voice of resistance tries to pull him away, because self-discipline means choosing what you want most over what you want now. And as he stands up and stretches, he feels something shift inside him, a small but important shift, like a door opening a little bit, letting in a small amount of light, and this light tells him something powerful. You do not need to be strong all at once. You only need to be consistent. And as Daniel walks outside into the fresh morning air, he feels the day beginning around him, the soft sunlight touching the tops of buildings, the cool wind brushing across his skin, the world slowly waking up, and he realizes that the journey of self-discipline is the same as learning a language. You grow little by little, step by step, day by day, with patience, practice, and kindness toward yourself. And this understanding fills him with a sense of gentle determination, because for the first time, he sees that the path to growth is not scary, it is not heavy, It is simply slow and steady, like walking a long road with a calm heart. And as he takes a deep breath and feels the new day rise, he tells himself quietly, "I can do this," and for the first time in a very long time, he truly believes it. After that first morning, Daniel feels a small spark inside him, a quiet hope that he has not felt in months, but soon he realizes that hope alone is not enough, because change is not a single morning, it is a series of mornings. And every day that he does not act, that spark can fade, and so the real challenge begins, the challenge of consistency, the slow, almost invisible work of showing up again and again even when nothing exciting is happening, even when no one is watching. And Daniel quickly discovers that the hardest part of self-discipline is not motivation, not learning new words in English, not reading long sentences or listening to conversations, but simply keeping the commitment he made to himself. And on the second day, he wakes up and immediately the familiar resistance appears, that quiet voice that says, "Stay in bed. Skip it today. Just rest. You can start again tomorrow," and he feels a strong temptation to obey it, because the bed is warm, the sheets are soft, and the world outside the window seems slow and quiet, almost asking him to join it in comfort. But Daniel remembers the small lesson from yesterday. Motivation is unreliable, but action is reliable, and so he pushes himself slowly, deliberately, to sit up, to place his feet on the floor, to take a deep breath. And even though it feels uncomfortable, he moves to his desk, opens the notebook, and begins again, not because he feels like it, not because he is excited, but because he promised himself he would, and he understands that this small repetition is more powerful than any burst of energy, more powerful than any sudden desire to change, because self-discipline is a muscle, and muscles are built slowly, one small action at a time. And while he writes English sentences, reads them aloud, listens carefully to the words, and repeats them softly, he notices that his mind begins to wander, that familiar thoughts of laziness, of doubt, of "I'm not good enough" creep in, but this time he recognizes them without panic, without judgment, simply noticing them like clouds passing across the sky. And he gently returns his attention to the task, saying quietly to himself, "This is practice. This is learning. This is growth." And as he continues, he feels a strange sense of calm, because the struggle itself is teaching him something new, that consistency is not about never feeling doubt, never feeling fear, never feeling resistance, but about acting despite them. And this is a lesson that applies not only to English or to small morning routines, but to life itself. And Daniel begins to see that self-discipline is a quiet victory, a victory that does not announce itself with fireworks or applause, but a victory that lives in the repeated decisions to show up, to act, to continue, even when it feels invisible, even when progress seems slow or unseen. And this understanding changes something inside him. Because before he believed that change required big gestures, sudden inspiration, or extraordinary talent, but now he knows that change is quiet, humble, and patient, and as he moves through his second day of practice, he notices small details. The way his voice sounds when he reads aloud, the way the words flow more smoothly than yesterday, the way the sentences make sense even if he must pause to think, and these small signs of growth feel like gentle encouragement, reminding him that slow progress is still progress, and that every small action matters more than he imagined. And then the afternoon comes, and with it new challenges, because life does not pause while he practices self-discipline. and unexpected distractions appear. The phone buzzes with messages, the doorbell rings, his mind drifts to thoughts of games or social media, and he feels the tension of choice again, the pull between comfort and growth, between old habits and new habits, and he realizes that self-discipline is like walking on a narrow path through a forest, where every step requires attention, awareness, and care, and if he wanders too far, he might lose his way, but if he walks steadily, one step at a time, he continues forward without even noticing how far he has traveled, and this insight comforts him, because he understands that mistakes, distractions, and delays are natural, that they do not erase his progress, and that the path itself is learning. And as he returns to his desk after a short break, he feels a sense of purpose, a gentle determination that steadies him, and he notices how his body feels lighter, his mind sharper, and his confidence quietly growing. And as he repeats his English practice, reading aloud, listening to each sound carefully, imitating pronunciation, he realizes that self-discipline strengthens not only skills but character, because choosing to act in the face of resistance teaches patience, courage, and resilience, and these qualities spill into other parts of life. The way he eats, the way he interacts with others, the way he manages time, the way he responds to challenges, and Daniel begins to understand that self-discipline is not a punishment. It is a gift you give yourself every day by honoring your own word, by respecting your own intentions, and by building a life that aligns with your hopes and dreams. And this thought gives him warmth, a feeling of care toward himself he never experienced before, a feeling that says, you are worthy of your own effort. You are capable of change. You are not defined by yesterday's choices, but by today's actions, and as evening comes, he reflects on the day quietly, without rush or judgment, noticing the small victories, the small steps, the moments he chose growth over comfort. And he writes in his notebook a simple note: I showed up. I acted. I am learning, and reading it aloud slowly, he feels a sense of pride that is not loud or boastful, but gentle, soft, like a calm fire that warms from the inside, and this quiet satisfaction motivates him to return tomorrow, not with pressure or fear, but with curiosity and care, because he begins to understand a subtle truth. Self-discipline grows when it is nurtured, when it is treated like a living thing that needs attention, patience, and kindness, and not like a punishment or a test. And as Daniel closes his notebook and looks out the window at the night sky, he sees the stars beginning to shine, small lights in the darkness, and he realizes that his journey of self-discipline is like those stars. Small beginnings that eventually form a universe of change, and he smiles softly, feeling a sense of calm determination, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same resistance, the same choices, and yet he is ready to face them. Because he has learned that showing up, acting, and practicing with patience is stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, stronger than comfort, and with that thought, he goes to bed, not with anxiety about the future, but with gentle confidence that the path is steady, the steps are real, and every small choice matters. And as he drifts into sleep, he dreams not of grand achievements or impossible victories, but of the quiet rhythm of his days, the steady building of skills, the slow, patient strengthening of his mind and heart. And he feels a deep sense of trust in himself, because he has discovered something that no motivation alone could teach: consistency, patience, and self-discipline are the true foundations of growth, and with them, he can face any challenge, learn any skill, and become the person he hopes to be, one small action at a time. As Daniel continues his journey into self-discipline, he begins to notice something deeper, something quiet but powerful: the way his mind works, the habits that shape his daily life without him even realizing. Because self-discipline is not only about forcing yourself to do things, it is also about understanding why you act the way you do, why sometimes you follow through and sometimes you don't. And one afternoon, while sitting at his desk, notebook open and pencil ready, he decides to pay close attention to his thoughts, to observe them like a scientist watching a tiny world, noticing how some thoughts lift him forward and some thoughts hold him back. And he realizes that his mind is full of patterns, habits that were formed over years. Habits of comfort, habits of procrastination, habits of distraction, habits of seeking quick pleasure, and yet in the same mind, there are small sparks of curiosity, small moments of courage, small desires to learn, to grow, to become better, and these sparks are often drowned out by the louder, older habits, the ones that say, "Stay where it is safe. Don't try. Don't risk. Don't change." And Daniel notices that these habits are not his enemy. They are simply his brain trying to protect him, trying to keep him comfortable, and this understanding surprises him, because for so long he blamed himself for failing. He thought he was weak, lazy, or unmotivated, but now he sees that his mind is just following patterns it learned, and patterns can be changed. And this realization gives him hope, because if patterns can be changed, then he can guide himself toward better patterns, toward habits that support learning, growth, and self-discipline. And he starts to experiment, slowly, carefully, noticing how small adjustments in his environment, his thoughts, and his routines can make following through easier. And he begins to understand the psychology behind habit formation, learning that the brain loves consistency, repetition, and rewards, that it will strengthen any pathway you travel often, whether it is a pathway of distraction or a pathway of growth. And this is where self-discipline meets strategy, because Daniel realizes that he does not have to fight against his mind with sheer willpower alone. He can work with it, gently guiding it toward the behaviors he wants to grow, shaping the environment, the reminders, the triggers, the rewards, to support the person he wants to become. And so he begins making small changes. He leaves his phone in another room when he studies. He sets small goals instead of overwhelming ones. He celebrates small wins instead of waiting for perfection. And he notices how these small adjustments make it easier to stay consistent, because he is no longer fighting his natural habits. He is redirecting them, and as he continues, he starts to understand the emotional side of habit and self-discipline, the way fear, doubt, and frustration appear when trying to build new habits, and he notices that these feelings are not signs of weakness, but signs of growth. That discomfort is a signal that he is moving into new territory, that the mind is learning to adapt, and this awareness makes him gentle with himself, because now he can see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to understand his patterns better, to refine his approach, and to continue moving forward. And one evening, as he closes his notebook after a practice session, he reflects quietly on the day, noticing the small ways his mind tried to resist, the small moments he chose to act anyway. And he feels a gentle pride in his consistency, a quiet joy in understanding himself, a soft excitement in seeing the possibility of change, and he writes a simple note: I am learning about my mind. I am learning my habits. I can guide myself, and reading it aloud slowly, he feels the words settle in his mind, planting seeds of self-awareness, because he now knows that self-discipline is not just about action, it is about understanding, awareness, and gentle guidance of the mind. And this insight gives him a new perspective, because he sees that most people struggle with self-discipline not because they lack desire, not because they are lazy, but because they do not understand the mind behind their habits. And once they understand it, change becomes not a battle, but a careful practice, a daily choice to act despite resistance, to redirect attention, to reinforce new patterns. And Daniel begins to feel that learning English, practicing new skills, and building a disciplined life are all connected because they require the same approach: small steps, awareness, repetition, patience, and curiosity. And as he thinks about the future, he realizes that this understanding will help him not only in learning English, but in every part of life, every skill, every dream, every challenge, because all growth begins with understanding the mind and then guiding it gently toward what matters most. And so he continues, observing his thoughts, listening to the voice of doubt without fear, responding with kindness and patience, and noticing the subtle shifts in his focus, in his habits, in his attention, and he begins to see how small actions compound over time. How 10 minutes of practice every day becomes hours of skill over weeks, months, and years, and this gives him a deep sense of trust in the process, because the mind responds to consistent, patient guidance, not sudden bursts of willpower, and he begins experimenting with small routines, practicing in the same place every day, starting with easy sentences, gradually adding complexity, repeating aloud, listening carefully, correcting gently, and rewarding himself with small celebrations, because he knows that reward strengthens new habits. And slowly, he feels his confidence grow, not as a sudden feeling, but as a quiet, steady presence, a soft assurance that he can continue, that he can learn, that he can improve. And one afternoon, he notices something remarkable. He looks back at the notebook, at the sentences he read weeks ago, and realizes he understands them better now, pronounces them more clearly, and remembers them longer. And he smiles because this is the visible proof of small, consistent effort, the reward of guiding the mind patiently. And he reflects on the emotional journey too, how fear of failure, frustration, and self-doubt were present at first, but now feel less powerful because awareness allows him to respond instead of react, and this teaches him the quiet, gentle power of observation, the power of noticing without judgment. And he begins to see that self-discipline is not about fighting the mind. It is about befriending it, understanding it, and guiding it. And as the evening sun pours through his window, he sits quietly, breathing deeply, feeling the calm that comes from small victories, small steps, and quiet awareness. And he writes a note for tomorrow: observe, practice, be gentle, continue. And reading it softly, he feels a sense of rhythm forming, a rhythm that will carry him forward, because self-discipline, like language learning, is not a race, not a test, not a performance. It is a rhythm, a gentle, steady, patient rhythm, one small action after another. And this understanding settles into him like soft music, a melody that encourages him to keep showing up, to keep guiding himself, to keep practicing, and as he lies down to rest that night, he feels a sense of calm satisfaction, not loud, not dramatic, but soft, steady, and warm, because he has learned something that will carry him far beyond English or morning routines, that understanding the mind, guiding habits gently, and showing up consistently is the quiet path to lasting growth, and he drifts into sleep feeling that for the first time, he is not chasing motivation, not depending on luck, not waiting for magic, but relying on the steady, patient work of guiding himself, one small step at a time. And that is the power of self-discipline. The next morning, Daniel wakes up with a quiet determination that feels different from before, because he has begun to understand not only the importance of self-discipline, but also the patterns of his mind, the way resistance appears, the way habits form, and yet even with this understanding, he knows that awareness alone does not move the body or focus the mind. Action is still required, and as he sits up slowly, feeling the cool floor beneath his feet and the soft light coming through his window, he notices the familiar tug of resistance, the gentle whisper that says, "It's too early. You can rest. You can skip today," and he smiles softly, because he knows this voice will always be there and that self-discipline is not about silencing it completely, but about acting in spite of it, acknowledging its presence, and gently returning to the task at hand. And he breathes deeply, placing his hand on the desk, opening the notebook to the page he left yesterday, and begins reading the English sentences slowly, deliberately, paying attention to each word, each sound, listening carefully to the rhythm of the language, feeling the words in his mouth as he speaks them aloud. And even though the mind drifts occasionally, he notices the drift without judgment and returns, patiently, calmly, over and over again, because he knows that this small, repeated effort is the real work of growth, the quiet, unseen work that builds skill, strength, and confidence over time. And as he continues, he notices something remarkable. The resistance that felt so strong at the beginning of the week now appears softer, weaker, because the mind learns what to expect, because repetition builds not only skill but also confidence, and because each small action reinforces a new pathway in the brain, creating momentum, and momentum is powerful, subtle, almost invisible, but when it builds, it carries you forward, even when motivation is low, even when doubt appears, even when distractions arrive. And Daniel begins to understand that the most important part of self-discipline is not grand plans, not perfect routines, not sudden inspiration, but the quiet accumulation of small, consistent actions, repeated daily. And as he reads aloud, listening carefully to the sounds, imitating them softly, he feels a subtle excitement. A feeling that is not loud or dramatic but gentle, steady, and encouraging, because he notices improvement, not because someone told him he is improving, not because he sees immediate results, but because he feels the language settling in his mind. Slowly, steadily, like a river carving its way through rock over time, and this feeling is powerful, because it reminds him that growth is a process, not a race, not a test, and that patience, attention, and consistency are the true keys to mastery. And as the day continues, he applies this understanding to other parts of life, noticing how small decisions shape the hours, the days, the weeks, and he begins experimenting with micro-goals, 10 minutes of focused study, a short walk for exercise, a single healthy meal, prepared with care, a quiet moment of reflection, and he notices how these small wins compound, creating momentum, a sense of forward motion that builds on itself, and he understands that this momentum is fragile at first, easily broken if he becomes careless, distracted, or impatient, but when nurtured with patience, kindness, and attention, it becomes powerful, almost unstoppable, and he notices the emotional side of this process too, that fear, doubt, and discomfort are normal, even necessary, because they signal that he is moving beyond old habits, beyond comfort zones, and into new territory, and instead of fighting these feelings, he learns to acknowledge them, to breathe through them, to act despite them. And this creates a subtle shift in his confidence, a quiet courage that grows not from absence of fear, but from facing it consistently, day after day, and as the afternoon sun pours through the window, he pauses, looking at the notebook, the words, the sentences, the small progress he has made, and he reflects on how far he has come in such a short time, realizing that the first day, when he only studied for 10 minutes, was the most important because it planted the seed of self-discipline. The seed that momentum now grows from, and he smiles, feeling a gentle warmth, a soft joy that is not loud but steady, because he understands that self-discipline is not punishment or restriction, but an act of care, of respect, of love toward oneself. A way to honor one's potential, one's intentions, one's dreams, and he writes a small note in the notebook, "Momentum matters. Small actions build big change." Keep going, reading it aloud slowly, letting the words settle in his mind, planting seeds for tomorrow, and he notices how this practice changes his relationship with time, that every moment, even a few minutes, has value, and that consistent effort, repeated day after day, is far more powerful than occasional bursts of activity, and as he moves through the evening, he reflects on the choices he made, the moments he acted despite resistance, the small wins he collected, and he feels a sense of calm satisfaction, a soft, steady energy that carries him forward without urgency, without fear, without harsh judgment, and he understands that this is the essence of self-discipline, the gentle, consistent accumulation of small actions, guided by awareness, patience, and care, and he begins to notice patterns in his learning too, how repeating sentences aloud strengthens memory, how listening carefully trains the ear, how slow, deliberate practice builds not only English skill but focus, patience, and confidence, and he realizes that self-discipline and learning are inseparable because both require showing up, paying attention, acting consistently, and embracing discomfort without fear. And as he lies down to rest that night, he feels a deep sense of trust in himself, a trust built not on motivation, not on luck, not on extraordinary effort, but on small, repeated, patient actions, and he knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new resistance, new moments of doubt. But he is ready because he has learned the quiet secret of self. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new resistance, new moments of doubt, but he is ready because he has learned the quiet secret of self-discipline. Consistency builds momentum, momentum builds confidence, and confidence creates the freedom to grow, to learn, and to become the person he hopes to be, step by step, day by day, moment by moment. And with this thought, he drifts into sleep, calm, steady, and certain that the journey is real, possible, and within his control. The next day, Daniel wakes up feeling a quiet excitement mixed with a little nervousness, because as he continues practicing self-discipline and English, He begins to realize that the real growth is not only in the actions he takes, but also in the moments when he reflects on those actions. And reflection becomes a new tool, a new skill, a way to understand himself, his habits, his thoughts, and his emotions more deeply. And as he sits at his desk, notebook open, pencil ready, he takes a slow, deep breath and thinks back on the past few days, noticing the patterns of resistance, the small victories, the moments when he chose action over comfort, and he realizes that reflection is like shining a gentle light on the path behind him. So he can see clearly where he has walked, what worked, what didn't, and where he can improve, and this understanding makes him feel calmer because it gives structure to his practice, purpose to his actions, and meaning to the effort he invests. And he writes in the notebook, slowly and deliberately, not rushing, not judging, but observing. Yesterday, I felt resistance. I acted anyway. I practiced for 10 minutes. I noticed my mind wandering. I returned. I learned a little more, and as he reads these words aloud, he notices how simple they are, but how powerful, because they record not only actions but awareness, the ability to notice, understand, and guide himself, and he feels a gentle sense of pride, a calm satisfaction that comes from understanding his own journey, because self-discipline without awareness is like walking in the dark without a light, and reflection is the light that illuminates the path, showing where he has grown, where he can grow, and reminding him that progress is real, even if small, even if slow, even if invisible to others. And as he continues, he notices the emotional patterns as well, how fear, doubt, and impatience appear when he tries something new, and how patience, curiosity, and gentle persistence help him continue, and he realizes that emotions are not enemies, not obstacles, not weaknesses, but signals, messages from the mind and body that guide him, and when he listens carefully, he can respond wisely instead of reacting automatically. And this awareness begins to transform the way he approaches not only English practice, but life itself, because he sees that every action, every choice, every small habit is connected to thought, attention, and emotion. And that by observing these connections, he gains control, clarity, and insight, and Daniel begins to notice that self-reflection strengthens his self-discipline, because when he pauses to reflect, he understands the reasons behind his resistance, recognizes the moments of success, and plans small improvements for the next session, and he notices that writing these reflections, reading them aloud slowly, and observing his own thoughts and feelings, creates a sense of calm focus that carries him forward without forcing, without tension, without anxiety, and as he looks at the notebook, the sentences, and the small notes he has been keeping, he sees a trail of growth, a quiet record of persistence, practice, and awareness, and he realizes that this trail itself is motivating because it shows him that small, consistent actions, combined with reflection, create real, measurable progress, and this motivates him not through pressure or expectation, but through gentle curiosity. Because he begins to want to see what happens next, what improvement is possible, how his mind, habits, and skills evolve with patience and care, and he notices that this approach reduces fear, because when he understands his patterns, acknowledges resistance, observes emotions, and plans small steps, the uncertainty of change feels less frightening, and the unknown future becomes a field of possibility rather than a place of anxiety, and this understanding gives him a sense of freedom, a soft confidence that he can face challenges calmly, patiently, and wisely, and as he reads aloud the English sentences again, repeating sounds carefully, noticing intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation, he sees that his focus is sharper, his attention longer, and his mind calmer, because reflection has made him aware of distractions and helped him redirect, and he begins to experiment with small adjustments, noting how they affect his practice, like which time of day he is most focused, which environment feels quiet and supportive, which words are difficult and need repetition, and this experimentation teaches him that self-discipline is not rigid, not about force, but about flexibility, awareness, and smart choices, and he notices that observing his own mind and habits gives him insight into human behavior in general, that everyone struggles with resistance, distraction, and comfort, and that the process of observing and guiding oneself is universal. And this gives him a sense of connection, empathy, and understanding beyond his own journey, and as the day passes, he continues reflecting, practicing, and observing, noticing the small improvements in memory, pronunciation, and confidence. And he writes another note in the notebook: reflection strengthens practice. Awareness guides action. Small steps build progress, and reading it aloud, he feels the calm satisfaction of clarity, insight, and progress, and he notices that reflection also increases patience, because he sees clearly that growth is slow, that mistakes are natural, that the mind learns gradually, and that repeated small actions, combined with awareness, create lasting change. And as evening comes, he pauses one more time, thinking about the entire day, the choices, the actions, the reflections, and he feels a sense of gratitude for the small steps he has taken, the awareness he has cultivated, and the momentum he has begun to build. And he writes a final note for the night: observe, act, reflect, continue tomorrow. And reading it aloud slowly, he feels the words sink in, planting seeds for the next day, the next week, the next month, because self-discipline is not a single act but a cycle: action, observation, reflection, repetition. And over time, this cycle transforms the mind, the habits, and the life, and as Daniel lies down to rest, he feels a soft confidence, a quiet excitement, and a deep trust in himself, knowing that through awareness, reflection, and consistent action, he is learning not only English, but the art of guiding his mind, shaping his habits, and creating the life he desires, one small, patient, deliberate step at a time. The next morning, Daniel wakes up feeling a quiet energy, not a sudden burst of motivation, not a dramatic feeling of excitement, but a gentle sense of readiness, because he has begun to understand that real change comes from small, consistent actions, and that every tiny decision, every small effort, adds up over time to create momentum. And he notices that yesterday's reflection has prepared him to act with more awareness today, to notice resistance before it becomes overwhelming, to recognize distractions before they pull him away, and to celebrate the smallest wins, because even small victories strengthen the habit and reinforce confidence. And as he sits at his desk, opens his notebook, and begins reading the English sentences aloud, he pays careful attention to each word, each syllable, each pause, noticing the sounds of the language, feeling the rhythm in his mouth, and listening carefully as if the words themselves are teaching him something new. And he realizes that these small moments of focused practice are the true building blocks of lasting skill, more important than long, inconsistent sessions or sudden bursts of effort, because consistent practice, repeated slowly, patiently, and carefully, rewires the mind, strengthens memory, and builds skill in a way that nothing else can. And as he continues, he notices how small wins create a sense of momentum that grows quietly, almost invisibly, until it becomes a force that carries him forward even when motivation fades, even when doubt appears, even when fatigue threatens, and he understands that celebrating small wins is not about pride or ego, but about recognition, awareness, and encouragement, like a gardener noticing each new sprout in the soil, each small green leaf that appears after careful tending, and this awareness encourages him to continue, because he sees evidence of growth, even if it is small and slow, and he begins to experiment with tracking these wins, writing them in his notebook, noting what he practiced well, what he improved, what he managed to complete despite resistance, and he reads these notes aloud slowly, feeling them sink in, reinforcing the pathways of self-discipline and confidence in his mind. And as he practices, he notices the emotional side of these small victories, how the satisfaction of completing a short practice, of repeating sentences accurately, of noticing improvement, creates a subtle, steady feeling of confidence and motivation, a quiet internal reward that is far stronger than external praise, because it comes from understanding oneself, seeing progress, and knowing that consistent effort, even small, matters, and he begins applying this approach to other areas of life. Noticing that small actions toward organization, exercise, health, or relationships also create momentum, that the mind responds to repeated, deliberate choices, and that the more he tracks, observes, and celebrates small wins, the easier it becomes to act, to stay consistent, and to build habits that last. And he notices that the mind loves repetition and reward, that small, positive feedback loops are more effective than harsh criticism or unrealistic expectations. And he begins to see that self-discipline is not punishment, not force, not rigid structure, but gentle guidance, awareness, and patience, combined with consistent action, and this understanding transforms the way he approaches challenges, making him feel capable, prepared, and confident even when obstacles appear, and he notices that challenges themselves become opportunities for small wins, because overcoming resistance, acting despite doubt, returning after distraction, and completing a short practice all count as victories. And this subtle shift in perspective changes his relationship with difficulty, making it less frightening and more a natural part of growth. And as he continues throughout the day, he tracks these small wins carefully, writes them in the notebook, and reflects briefly on how each contributes to larger progress, and he begins to notice that progress is not always linear, that some days are harder, some days slower, some days full of resistance, and yet even these days contain small victories, small steps, moments of persistence, and moments of awareness, and recognizing them strengthens his resilience, patience, and determination. And he writes a simple note for the end of the day: small wins matter. Keep practicing. Progress is real, and reads it aloud slowly, letting the words sink into his mind, planting seeds for tomorrow, and he notices how this practice changes his internal dialogue, replacing self-criticism with gentle observation, fear with curiosity, and doubt with determination, and he feels a sense of calm strength growing quietly inside him, like the roots of a tree spreading slowly but firmly into the earth, and he begins to realize that lasting change is built not from dramatic effort, sudden inspiration, or external pressure, but from the steady accumulation of small, consistent actions, reflection, awareness, and recognition of progress. and this insight fills him with quiet excitement, because he now understands that every minute he invests, every sentence he reads aloud, every small decision to act despite resistance, is creating a foundation that will support not only English learning, but every area of life. And he feels a sense of mastery forming, not in a loud, visible way, but quietly, internally, in the confidence, focus, and patience that develop day by day, and he notices how this approach reduces stress and anxiety, because he no longer worries about perfection or immediate results. He simply acts, observes, reflects, and celebrates, trusting the process. And he begins to experiment with extending this approach, noticing how long-term habits, slowly built and reinforced by small wins, can transform entire routines, learning practices, and personal growth. And he writes another note: momentum grows. Small wins accumulate. Keep going patiently, and reading it aloud slowly, he feels the words settle in his mind, planting seeds for tomorrow, and as the evening comes, he reflects on the day quietly, noticing the accumulation of small victories, the awareness of mind and habits, the gentle progress in English skills, and the quiet confidence that grows with each deliberate, consistent action. And he smiles softly, feeling calm, steady, and ready to face tomorrow, because he has discovered the subtle, powerful truth that lasting change is built from small wins, awareness, and consistent action, one patient, deliberate step at a time. And with that thought, he lies down to rest, feeling the quiet satisfaction of progress, the calm confidence of momentum, and the deep trust in himself that comes from guiding his mind, habits, and actions gently but consistently, knowing that the journey continues, steadily, day by day, moment by moment. The following morning, Daniel wakes up and feels a quiet awareness settling in his mind, a sense that change, real change, cannot be rushed, and that the impatience he used to feel in learning English or building habits is a natural part of human nature, but not a helpful part. And as he sits at his desk, notebook open, pencil in hand, he reflects on the days behind him, the small wins, the moments of resistance overcome, and he notices how everything he has learned so far points to one essential truth: patience is not passive waiting, it is active persistence, careful attention, and calm understanding that progress comes step by step, moment by moment, practice by practice. And this realization fills him with calm focus, because he now understands that trying to force rapid improvement leads to frustration, burnout, and loss of confidence, while practicing patiently, steadily, and thoughtfully builds deep, lasting skill and self-discipline. And as he begins reading the English sentences aloud, slowly and deliberately, he notices how his pronunciation has improved subtly, how the rhythm of the language feels smoother, how the words flow more naturally. And he smiles softly because he recognizes that these improvements are the product of repeated, patient practice rather than sudden effort. And he notices that patience is also about observing his mind, noticing resistance, distractions, and frustration without judgment, and gently returning to the task over and over again, because this gentle return strengthens both skill and confidence. And he begins to see how patience works not only in learning but in life, in relationships, in managing emotions, in approaching challenges, and in building any meaningful habit, because the same principle applies everywhere. Consistent, patient effort, repeated over time, leads to growth, while rushing, forcing, or expecting instant results creates tension, fear, and disappointment. And as he continues, Daniel experiments with extending his practice sessions slightly, adding a few more sentences, listening more carefully, repeating sounds, and noticing the subtle improvements, and he realizes that patience allows him to take these steps without pressure, without stress. Simply observing progress and trusting the process, and he begins to notice how patience strengthens his emotional resilience, because he no longer feels defeated when mistakes occur, when progress seems slow, or when distractions appear. Instead, he understands that these are natural parts of the journey, moments to notice, correct, and continue, and this understanding transforms his relationship with failure, making it a teacher rather than an enemy, a source of insight rather than frustration, and he reflects on the power of patience in habit formation as well, noticing how small, consistent actions, repeated patiently over days, weeks, and months, strengthen neural pathways in the brain, reinforce focus, build skill, and create the foundation for mastery. And he writes in his notebook, patience is active. Patience is persistence. Patience builds mastery, reading the words aloud slowly, letting them sink into his mind, planting seeds for his continued growth, and as he continues practicing, he notices how patience allows him to focus more clearly on the quality of his actions rather than rushing to complete tasks, how it allows him to savor the learning process, to notice details, to correct mistakes gently, and to enjoy the small improvements that happen each day, and he feels a quiet satisfaction growing inside him, because he understands that mastery is not a destination, not a single achievement, but a lifelong process of practice, observation, and growth, and patience is the key that makes this process sustainable, enjoyable, and effective. And as the afternoon arrives, he experiments with mindful pauses during his practice, taking a moment to breathe, notice his posture, adjust his focus, and return fully to the task. And he realizes that these small pauses, combined with patient repetition, improve his concentration, reduce frustration, and make learning more enjoyable. And he reflects on how patience also strengthens relationships, because when he applies the same calm awareness to interactions with others, he notices that listening, understanding, and responding patiently creates trust, empathy, and connection, and he begins to see that patience is not only a skill for learning English or building habits, but a life skill that influences every part of human experience. And he writes another note in the notebook: patience strengthens mind, habits, relationships, learning. Reading it aloud slowly, feeling the meaning settle deeply, and he notices how patience interacts with consistency and reflection, how repeated action requires patience, and reflection deepens understanding, which in turn reinforces patience, creating a positive cycle that builds mastery naturally, without forcing or rushing. And he begins to apply this insight to the small challenges that arise during the day. The mind wanders, distractions appear, motivation dips, and he responds not with frustration but with calm awareness, gently returning to the task. And he notices that this approach reduces internal tension, increases focus, and makes action feel lighter, easier, and more natural. And as the evening comes, he reflects quietly on the day, the small improvements, the patience he practiced, the awareness he cultivated, and he writes a final note for the night: patience plus practice plus reflection equals growth. Reading it aloud slowly, feeling a deep sense of calm satisfaction, because he understands that the journey of self-discipline, learning English, and personal growth is not about speed or drama, but about steady, patient, consistent action, guided by awareness and reflection, and as he lies down to rest, he feels a quiet confidence, a calm determination, and a soft excitement for tomorrow, because he knows that with patience, consistency, reflection, and small daily actions, real mastery is not only possible, it is inevitable, growing step by step, day by day, moment by moment, and he drifts into sleep feeling secure, steady, and ready to continue the journey. Thank you so much for joining today's lesson here at JBC English Learning Academy. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me what you want to learn next. Your support helps the channel grow and helps me create more lessons for you. Take care, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next class.